Greetings, trombonists at large. I am the Vagrant Trombone, here with terrible lighting, to talk to you about something that is a good thing, but has just a little piece of annoyance involved with it, and that's about copying music. So let's get started. Well, so what is the issue? In recent times, I have been going to rehearsals and I've been seeing a positive thing take place. People who play in some of these bands that I work in, they have been copying out music in keys that are better for the vocalist. They've been writing out lead sheets and doing things like that, and using a music copy program, Muse Score. Now, if you're not familiar with Muse Score is a really great open source free app that you can get for copying music, and it's really good. I've been, as many of you may know, I've been copying music a long time, and I used to do layouts for my dad when I was a teenager, and I continued to copy music and do a lot of stuff for myself, but I always used Finalé, or but because Finalé was a bit of a problem, because if I didn't use it enough, I would forget how to use it, and I would turn it on and I would sit there staring at it, not knowing what to do, because there weren't a lot of online tutorials to help me out. I used to have to get out my manual, which was like a Bible, and go through that and have to try to figure out what to do. And then I heard about Sibelius. And when Sibelius came along, it was much easier for me to use. Again, I still had a big, thick manual, but it was a little more intuitive. And for some reason, the the pull-down menus and things just worked in my head better. But I have since forgone Sibelius because it became a per-month fee platform, and I am doing that. So I went back to Finalé and have been very happy for my return to Finalé. But what I have seen most of the people doing that I've been talking to, these younger musicians, is they've been using Muse Score, and I've played with it a little bit, and it's really a great program. It's very powerful. It reminds me a lot more of Sibelius than it does of Finalé, and it's got a lot of great things going for it, including the amount of people using it and taking an opportunity to kind of learn a new skill with copying their own music and going about doing those things. Unfortunately, some of the people that I work for are either rock and roll guitar players or jazz piano players, and they're not, I don't want to call them amateur musicians, because they're not. They're excellent musicians, but they're not full-time musicians. They're part-time musicians. They're guys who like to play. Like me, I'm retired, so I like to play with the retired guy bands or with the part-timer bands, and we have a lot of fun playing restaurants and things like that. But enough of that. What I want to talk about are issues that I've been seeing with copying out parts. I made my living for many years reading a lot of music, and contemporary copying has a certain look to it that just makes it easier to read, and I've become very accustomed to reading that style of copy. Now, unfortunately, for a lot of players who are either classical or guys who don't read a lot of music, they have the book, they learn how to read it, they learn how to play it, they memorize it, and then they just play it. They don't really worry about having to make the music legible or easy to read. Where I come in and, on the rehearsal before the gig, and I look at the music, and it's sometimes it takes a lot of concentration to figure out what that music looks like. So just to dive right into it, one of the things that I've found on every music program that I've ever used, including some really just dibble-dabbly ones, that really early ones that came out, and they weren't very good at all. Then along came Finalé, changed the game. But one of the problems that all these programs have in common is they beam eighth notes together. they'll always beam 4/8 notes together. And the problem is, if I'm reading quickly, I get stuff like this. And the problem with this isn't that it's not readable. It's not easily readable. I've got eighth note rests floating inside of a beamed series of notes. And it's just confusing to the eye when I'm running through it fast. Now, can I get accustomed to reading this? Yes, I have become more accustomed to reading this. But it still slips me up sometimes if I'm reading quick. So it's much easier if the eighth note is broken away and the beat 2 is beamed together. I like to see my music beamed in beats, not in off beats, but in beats. And if it's in 2, I like to see the bar easily distinguishable between beats 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So it's always nice, like if you have a series of quarter notes and then you have a quarter note in the middle, you want to beam 2/8 notes so that I can visually see the 2 halves of that measure quickly and easily. The next example is stuff that looks like this, where you've got an 8th rest and then 3/8 notes. That in my mind, especially if it's reversed, 3/8 notes and an 8th rest, that in my mind, if I'm just scanning through quickly before I have to play something, reads as a triplet. Back in the early days when I was playing, a lot of guys copied their music by hand. And oftentimes they wouldn't put the little bracket with a 3 on it. It would just be 3/8 notes. And still in my head, when I see 3/8 notes beamed together, that reads as a triplet. Now, on second glance, it's easy to see that it's going to add up to 4 beats, right? Not a triplet and 3 beats. So it is readable, but it's not quick and easy to read. It's much better if you break off one of those 8th notes with the 8th rest and beam the other 2 together. Or better yet, if you have da da da, you want 2/8 notes and a quarter note with a dot on it. That makes it easier to read. The next thing that can be a real drag is when you have an 8th note at the beginning of the measure and then a quarter note, which starts on the and of whatever beat it is, and a 1, and a 2. If I have quarter notes and they're on the off beat, then some rests at another 8th note, it can be hard to figure out what that rhythm is. I've got to stop and look at it. Now, I know you're thinking, oh, well, you got to stop and look. So what? When I'm turning pages, sometimes there's not enough time to go through all the music to make sure I know what everything looks like. And then there are times where someone puts something in front of you, they call something out and say, let's do this. I've never seen it before, put it in front of me. And I don't have the time to analyze it while I'm trying to read it, along with everything else that goes into reading music. So it's always helpful if you avoid putting quarter notes on the weak beat, on the upbeat inside of a measure. Unless, of course, it's in 2, and I can distinguish beats 1 and 2 from beats 3 and 4 easily. That's a different story. Another thing that I've come to see in a lot of the music is the use of multi-rests, and that's a good thing. But in this example, there's 4 measures and then 11 plus 3.5 beats, or 4 beats, and then a hit on the and of 4. The problem with this is the first time I played this, this looked to me like it was going to be a blues, 12-bar phrase, and then a hit. But what it actually ended up being when I counted it was 8 plus 3. And the guy next to me, he was feeling it, and danged if he didn't come in 3 measures or 4 measures early, because he felt the end of the phrase and then put a punch on the beginning, in the first measure of what he thought was the next phrase, but it wasn't. It was the 9th measure, because it wasn't 12 bars, it's 8, 8, and 8. So that's another thing too. When you have multi-rests, try to group those multi-rests with the phrase of the piece of music. That way it's just easier, more intuitive to read, especially if you're having to do it on a bandstand in front of an audience and there are other things going on. It's easier to feel that first phrase go by and then know to wait 3 measures plus another 4 beats to hit that punch on the and of 4. So yeah, multi-rests, and this isn't that big a deal, but this one can be a bit of a stickler, is this example right here. These are all pieces of music that I've actually taken photographs of on gigs with different bands. These aren't all from the same copyist. What they all have in common is they were all copied with Muse Score by a piano player or guitar player, somebody who's not as accustomed to having to read single line music parts like a trombone player, a trumpet player, a saxophone player. They tend to copy in a more legible way only because of familiarity with having to read their own music. So this is one where you've got an 8th rest, 2 8th notes, and an 8th rest, and then 8th notes, ba-da, ba-da, right? So, ba-ba, ba-da, ba-da. It's not a hard thing to read, but when reading it fast, ba-da, 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 it's easier to read if that were an 8th note and a quarter note with a dot on it. Now, one of the things that I have noticed over the years about people copying music and writing music on computer is all of the accents and dots and things like that are in a separate menu that you have to access using different keystrokes. This is where I really liked Sibelius, because I could reach up and I could access those articulations and put them on the note while I was copying. Whereas with Finalé, I have to go back and then mark each one and make a second pass. But I still do that in Finalé instead of just making, if I want it short, just make a 16th note or an 8th note. And the reason why is because lots of rests are hard to read. The less that you have in a measure, the easier it is to read. This is what I was told when I was copying semi-professionally back in the late 80s and 90s. The less information you give your musician, the more likely they are to get it right. That's what we were always told. So you don't want a lot of clutter in a measure. I'm sure a lot of you who've read classical music, you'll see something weird, or band music. You see this thing where you've got half notes and they've got dots on them. And you're thinking, why do you put dots over a half note or a half note with a housetop accent? Well, the reason why is the dot, if it's after the note, adds half the length of the note that preceded it. If a dot is above the note is played at half its value, but the note still takes up the same amount of linear time in that measure. So a quarter note with a dot on it, you play it like an 8th note. A half note with a dot on it, you'd play like a quarter note. And if you do that, and your musicians know what they're looking at, it's a lot easier to read that than it is to read 8th note, 8th rest, 8th note, 8th rest, 8th note, 8th rest. It's much easier to have 4 quarter notes with dots on them and go bop, 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 than it is to read that. Because then if you have a different rhythm, like 2 8th note rests together, bop, 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 it can be hard to read. Or even worse, bop, 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 right? That if it's just 8th notes with 8th rests after it, that's really hard to read. So it's better that you can distinguish that 8th rest and that syncopation stands out in the measure, just visually stands out strongly in the measure because it looks different from the rest of it. But if you just 8th notes and 8th rests and 8th notes and 8th, it all becomes cluttered. And if anyone has any bit of dyslexia like me, it can be hard to read that stuff. Another thing is getting the correct placement of the key change. This last example, the key change actually comes in the middle of that multi-rest. Well, when I hear the key change, and I'm playing, if I'm reading a piece of music and I hear the key change, my assumption was I read those, I counted the rest wrong. And so I didn't know where I was. I tried to come in where the key change was, and it sounded wrong. So if you've got a key change, make sure you put the key change in the multi-rest where it belongs and just add those extra rests. I know that it adds keystrokes, and we're all thinking about efficiency and trying to get it done. But if you do that, if you do it like this, like that example, it's for sure you're going to have somebody get confused. Someone's going to mess up. And the more people you add to your band, when you start getting 8, 9, 10 people in your band, you're going to run into a lot of problems. So yeah, I'm just trying to help that out there. So I hope you found this informative, and well, you know, I think it is a great thing that so many people are taking more time to learn how to copy music. I think that's a great thing because it opens up so many greater opportunities, like making your own arrangements, adding stuff in, or doing mashups or whatever you want to do with the music you want to write. I really encourage it, but always try to remember that you want to make the music easy to read. And one of the things that's been a big failing with the development of every computer program is beaming notes, and also with the articulations. Articulations, when we wrote music, when I would copy music, you would write eighth note, quarter note, eighth note, quarter, quarter, and it would be dot, and that would put a dot, 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 dot on top of everything, and it's bop, 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 bop. It's easy to read, and you know what to do with it. But with the advent of computers, we don't use as much articulation on top of the note heads, and because of that, it's actually made the music harder to read, because instead of writing a note with a dot on it or a house top, you just write a 16th note with a 16th rest and an 8th rest after it, and then maybe another 8th rest after that, and another 8th note, and all of a sudden it's hard to read. So just know when you're copying out your music, and I encourage everyone to do it, when you're copying out your own music, think about those things. I've actually gone as far as writing out the rhythms on a piece of paper so that I can see them, not in the computer, and get a better feel for how that rhythm looks and how easy it is to read. And I've done some crazy things too, like with this, you know, where you've got eighth notes. But the reason why I did it that way is because it's bop, 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 bop. And so it looks weird, but after the first time you play it, it's okay. So know that you can still do those things when it's appropriate, as long as you know that it's going to be, in the long term, it's easier to read. It's just something that will help you on your musical journey. So, I hope you found this useful, and maybe we'll see you on the bandstand.